This is episode 11 of the Beyond Unreal podcast. I am the White Dragon.
And this is Sir Briz.
So, lots of changes this week. This was kind of the you're not allowed to have fun changes week. So let's just list the changes really quickly, and then we'll go into detail about a lot of them. Now, first thing, just a pet peeve of mine, they made it so that when you hit fly, you don't just involuntarily go up. So I was happy about that one. You might have seen in a couple of videos where that was happening to me. It was very annoying. But then the other big ones were they changed the wall dodge vertical impulse slightly. They added a alt fire prototype for the impact hammer, so you could shoot a projectile and it basically will block other projectiles. They tweaked the dodge rolling considerably. They also have a race map that you can use to compare different movement types and see how fast they are compared to each other. And then there was the Translocator changes. They added charges to the Translocator. So let's start from the top of that list. What changed with the vertical impulse exactly?
So they pretty much just made it so that when you dodge off of the wall, you get a little bit of a boost instead of going just straight off the wall. But more importantly, they increased the vertical impulse you get on the second wall dodge. So it makes it a little bit more useful for doing a second wall dodge as opposed to just doing your first wall dodge. So there were a lot of people that were complaining that doing more than one wall dodge was useless because on the second wall dodge it would just drop you straight to the ground. This gives you a little bit of a boost so that it is more useful, but it's not nearly as much boost as the initial wall dodge gives you.
It definitely feels better, but for me it's not to the point where it's terribly useful yet.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that they've made it so that on the second dodge there's actually a point to it, maybe in a corner, but it's still kind of like a fun thing. It's not like a I'm going to win games sort of a thing.
Yeah, it seems like they're still kind of trying to chase what they want from wall dodge versus what Hypno posted in his video of multiple wall dodge, where he was basically flying around rooms and getting up to the ceiling and all that kind of stuff.
Without making it totally OP,
yeah,
basically.
So, I mean, I think one thing they're trying to avoid right now is making it so that multiple wall dodging off of the same wall is as effective as it is. But so far they haven't done anything to adjust what angle you have to dodge off the wall from or any of that kind of stuff, or how much push from the wall you get. So it is still possible to dodge multiple wall dodge basically along a single wall.
And you notice kind of a common theme about a lot of these movement mechanics is that they're kind of interesting, but right now they're not super useful.
Yeah.
So that goes with the dodge rolling. So when we talked about it last week, there wasn't a whole lot we could say about it because they just barely put it in. We really didn't have the time to test it. Now this week, I've definitely played around with it a lot on my own, but there's still a problem with the replication, so you really can't do it online.
Yeah.
But that said, they've changed it. So they've made it so that the rolling is actually slower than the regular walk speed. Walk is 900, rolling is 800. But the dodge speed landing factor is faster coming out of a roll.
Yeah.
So it kind of makes up a little bit for the time that you lost while you were in the roll. It doesn't completely make up for it, but compensates a little bit.
Yeah. So last week we talked a lot about the problems dodge rolling could have, more theoretically than practically. I posted on the forums and basically said, here's what you can do right now with dodge rolling, which was you could move a lot faster. In the game, there's a way to print out your average speed, and it was easy to keep your average speed more than 10% faster than running just by doing the dodge roll over and over again, especially if you mixed it with wall dodges and all that kind of stuff while you were going. And so after I posted that, and a couple of other people posted similar complaints about it, then they introduced this where they dropped the maximum speed in a dodge roll to 800. So right now they made it so that your speed kind of reduces a little bit till you get to 800 with some kind of acceleration happening in there. But for the most part, you run along about 900, you dodge about 1300, and then you roll about 800. And so you can tell in there that there's a big speed difference between all these different things. Normally, when you land a dodge, you have your speed knocked down to 20% of what it normally would be. If you do a dodge roll, it gets knocked down to about half of what it normally would be. So by making all these changes, they were trying to make it so that dodge roll wasn't very useful for traversal, but it was really useful for mixing up your combat movement.
Yeah, and the problem that I have with it right now, before I was worried that it would be too useful for traversal. They pretty much killed that part of it. But I don't really find it terribly useful in combat now. The trade-off is basically you move slower in exchange for a smaller hitbox and not getting headshot. And to me, that trade-off just isn't worth it right now. I'm not really sure how they could change it to make that better. One of the problems that I see is that a lot of the movement mechanics that have been discussed are really talking about changing your speed. And that's the big thing, is that what makes you harder to hit, it's speed.
Yeah.
Moving targets are harder to hit, and the faster that moving target is moving, the harder it will be to hit.
And that's a really important thing. I think that the part of the problem with the way things are right now is multifaceted. So there's one angle of this where a lot of the mechanics that have been added to the base movement don't really add much depth to the movement right now. I think part of the problem with that is that the base movement itself doesn't really feel like it's in the right place. Yeah. It's not really fun to just move around in a multiplayer setting right now without doing any of these extra moves. And so the randomness of adding something like a dodge roll doesn't really improve your survivability or anything like that right now. All it does is add an element of predictability to already fairly predictable movement.
And this just goes back, I said that in jest, and I really do mean this in jest, that this was like the no fun week. Because I feel like that the changes that they made were really necessary. But at the same time, I don't really see anything in this game right now that just really stands out to me was really well done and fun. And I'm not saying that there has to be some sort of game-changing mechanic that really makes the game unique. I'm totally down with, hey, if it was like UT99 and it was more polished. Or even if it was more like UT 2004 and it was just really polished. But it just feels like mush right now. And maybe now is a good time to just go back and try really insane things again. Because I think that we need to do something to bring some of that back. Because I really get the feeling from the community, like just the overall mood from people really changed this week. When they kind of sat down and said, okay guys, like that was really fun, but now we have to actually make something that can actually work in a popular game. Takes us to the Translocator, because I think that's the one that's really upsetting a lot of people, right?
Yeah, so the changes that they made to Translocator this week, basically, they added a 5 charge limit to the Translocator. Obviously, that's caused a lot of people a lot of heartburn. Adding charges to the Translocator was one of the more controversial changes, I think, that they've made in the UT series.
Yeah, so this is the thing that really bothers me. Well, so before I get into that, let's just be clear about the way that it works right now, today, before I go into the way that things work. So the way that things are right now, if you throw the Translocator at the rate at which it will get you somewhere the fastest, you do not run out of charges. And this is actually, as far as I can tell, this is the most forgiving implementation of a recharge that we've had in the Unreal Tournament series. It's more forgiving than the UT 2004 one. The UT 2004 one, you would run out of charges. This one, I'm not running out of charges.
I think that a lot of people have a lot of valid opinions about the topic of the Translocator, but part of my problem with the way things are right now is that a lot of the discussion that's happening around the Translocator is more the same kind of arguments we were having with the dodge jump, and it's really frustrating because I would like to see people making good arguments and trying to affect change. I think that the Translocator could be balanced in a different way, but nobody's come and said, here's a solution that's an alternative to what Epic came up with that solves the same kind of problems. But in order to do that, you have to see what kinds of problems they're trying to solve. a lot of people right now are happy to just ignore any problems or any arguments that anybody has made about the Translocator and live in a little bit of a la-la land where the Translocator's perfect and there was nothing to change.
The history, okay, this has always been controversial. You can go and follow the history. I was just doing a search on the BeyondUnreal forums for anywhere that people mentioned the Translocator. There was a lot of threads of people complaining about the Translocator. And you notice anytime that like a new player came in and they had a really big pet peeve, it was always the Translocator. And you could see that around May 2000, at least on our forum, was when people started to say, hey, people are teletraining. And what teletraining was is that they were throwing the disc and then translocating as quickly as the game would allow them to do so. And therefore you were much harder to hit.
Yeah.
Because you were just skipping around everywhere. And Epic came in and they changed it. I don't think a lot of people realize that even in UT99, they nerfed the Translocator.
Yep.
They introduced a delay so that the amount of time between when you threw it and when you could translocate, what we're going to call the refire delay, they nerfed it. It was a problem. A lot of like casual average gamers did not like this. Because CTF was a really popular game type. But you know what else was a really popular game type? Instagive CPF. And I'm sure you know exactly what they think about translocators, right? And that's way more popular than regular CTF is. So you can't say that nobody has a problem with it. The issue is that the people that will have a problem with it aren't here right now, right?
Yeah.
They're the casual gamers, and those are really the guys that Epic are thinking about when they're making these kinds of changes. I really agree with a lot of people in that an unlimited translocator in a competitive setting, it can work. I mean, it can be balanced out. It's just a question of, is that really a game that's going to be fun for the maximum number of people? CTF right now is a very niche game type. The people that like CTF really, really like it. But it is a very small group of players that are actually still playing it.
Well, and the thing with that, too, is that UT itself is really a niche game. And It has been for a really long time. Even 2K3, 2K4, and UT3, none of those three games made UT less of a niche game. All of those games were niche games. And anyone that tried to claim that UT 2004 was an insanely popular game is completely wrong. I don't have any other thing to say about that. But if you look at the kinds of changes that they made in all of those games to try to balance things out, they were geared more towards those kind of players. Does that mean that they succeeded at those goals? No, not necessarily.
They definitely didn't.
And the thing to take away from that is not that UT was the perfect implementation, but that the perfect implementation doesn't exist yet. And so when I say that I want people to come in and say, here's a solution to this problem that's an alternative to what Epic has come up with, I think the community could come up with a solution that doesn't necessarily involve limited charges or something like that, and ends up getting into the game and working better for casual players and for competitive players. But the way that things are being argued right now, that's not going to happen. So the problem that Dodge Jump supporters had originally was that Epic was not real interested in implementing something like double jump in the game again. And so their argument had to be focused on what Epic thought about Dodge Jump and going from there. That had to be the starting point, and it never really materialized that way. So with a Translocator, the only way you're going to get Epic to change their mind on limited recharges is to start with the problem that they were trying to solve and how they solved it and work from there. Saying that there's not a problem doesn't really work. There was a problem.
There was a problem.
And Epic was trying to solve it. There's one thing that people seem to forget, I think, with the limited recharges that I think Epic liked about it, and that's that for whatever number of recharges you get, like if you have 5 recharges, you can basically fire off those recharges as fast as you want to with very low refire rate.
Yeah, you can teletrain, and what I mean by teletraining is translocating as fast as possible. You can teletrain or 5 shots.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you can just stop and wait for it to recharge, and it recharges very quickly in the current implementation.
And at least in previous games, there's very good messaging on when you're going to be able to translocate again. There's those two things that kind of have to be a part of any solution that's an alternative to those two things.
There's good messaging.
Yeah, good messaging has to apply. And the other thing is that I think Epic sees the ability to do what the unlimited translocator could do for a limited number of shots is something that increases the utility of the gun, but also adds a limitation. And something in an alternative solution would have to do something similar to that.
Yeah. So let's break down the different elements of the translocator here a little bit. I think that that would be really useful. So I think that there are gameplay outcomes that people want, and then there are the specific mechanics or properties of the translocator that we can modify to achieve those outcomes, right? So there's a couple of things that the translocator allows us to do. The first one is that it allows us to get to the location that we need to be faster and without interruption. So I can translocate through the middle of a battle if I need to go and get to the enemy flag carrier or wherever it is that I need to go. And that is the strongest part of the translocator. That's really what makes CTF and Unreal Tournament fun, is because you can get there where you need to be immediately without having to dick around with everything else that's going on, okay? The second gameplay outcome is, and I've seen a lot of players call this juking, what basically is to make you hard to hit. When you translocate very, very quickly and your character is jumping around a lot, it makes you very hard to hit.
Yep.
The third one is using it in actual battle to gain a field advantage. So this one didn't really exist in UT99 as much as it did in UT2K3 and 2K4, because the UT2K4 translocator went quite a bit further, and it was a straighter arc, so it was a little bit easier, at least for me, to shoot it to a specific location and go straight there. Mm-hmm. So in UT 2004, it was basically shoot, switch to the translocator, throw, translocate, switch back, headshot, back away from the wall, or whatever it was that you needed to do. Get that high position advantage and then shoot down at them.
Okay, so this is a skill that I remember learning in 2K3 was to shoot the translocator, jump, translocate, switch to lightning gun, shoot someone, switch to translocator, jump, shoot the translocator, translocate again. Like, the amount of skill involved in that was ridiculous, but that was like the fast weapon switch made that into a useful skill.
Right. In UT99, to do that sort of a thing, you usually have to take 2 or 3 hops with the translocator to get to it. So it wasn't as strong. Okay. It was so incredibly useful to do that sort of a thing that new players literally just couldn't compete. And that was a hard skill to learn. You really had to practice the mechanics of it, doing it over and over again, and to be able to do it in battle. I think a lot of us 2004 players, it's just second nature, but to somebody that's never done it before, it was just insane. So what did Epic do? They reduced the number of charges that you get, and they reduced the distance that it went so that they couldn't do that anymore. So that brings us to properties of the translocator. So one of them is the arc and the distance that the translocator goes, and how many throws you actually get. Okay, the other properties that we can look at is how fast do they recharge, and what is the time between when you throw the translocator and when you can actually translocate. If you look at the way that it's balanced in the current game against the gameplay outcomes, if you believe that the main outcome that you want is that you want to be able to get to where you want to without having to worry about running out of charges, the current implementation actually does that very, very well.
So one thing that I think Epic was trying to do was retain as much of the value of the translocator in the original UT as they could, while also introducing the balance elements that they wanted to introduce to it. And in order to do that, they came up with this solution where for a number of charges, it's identical to the UT translocator. In every way other than the arc of the disc, right?
Yep.
in terms of how you could use it, you didn't actually lose any noticeable skill. It just limited how far you could go. So if you wanted to teletrain, you could teletrain just fine, but on face you would only make it halfway across the map before you had to recharge again. And I think that was intended. Like, they didn't want you to be able to teletrain across the entire map, turn right around, and teletrain back to the other side. In order to limit that, this is a solution they came up with. And back to my point from earlier, I do believe that there could be an alternative solution to that. But we have to give it to them, because based on the past 3 games, they haven't learned whatever lesson the community thinks they need to learn.
Yeah.
The UT3 translocator is the most frustratingly constricting translocator in the entire series.
Oh, it ruins CTF. In order to make this game successful and to approach this idea successfully, we all have to be a little bit open-minded. And that's why I'm saying, hey, let's look at what is the specific outcome that you want, and what is the mechanic that you really need, or the property that you really need to accomplish that outcome. Because I think that right now what's happening is people hear limited charges and they just kind of freak out without thinking, okay, actually, maybe the way that they limited it actually allows me to still have what I want.
Yep, I agree with that. Yep. So before we be finished, I want to just talk a little bit about the racetrack map.
Yes.
So on the racetrack map, they basically have these paths that you can go down between 2 points that are the same distance for each track, and see how fast you can get from one end to the other. And what I found as I've been messing around with these is that you pretty much can only get from one end to the other in about 4 seconds with any combination of moves, with the exclusion of the boost dodge. Yes. Boost dodging will allow you to get through significantly faster than any other form of travel. And to me, that just means that boost dodge is still a mechanic that we probably have to tone down at some point. But I think Epic's been avoiding it for one reason or another.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that boost dodge is really fun, but it's really hard to justify it being in there considering some of the other decisions that we've made, especially with the dodge jump and so forth. But I would like to see it stay, because like I was saying before, right now the game kind of feels like mush to me. I don't really, there's nothing that really stands out to me that's like, wow, this particular thing about the game I think is done really well and I think is really fun. It's not there. Now, maybe part of that is that I just can't get over the speed right now.
Yeah, and I think that that's the big problem. So if you look at previous UT games, there's not really anything magical about just the movement itself, right?
Not really.
The movement is sufficient for the purposes of the game. And I think that that's really what makes UT unique in arena shooters, because everybody's chasing the perfect movement in every arena shooter that comes out. But UT has focused more on balancing sufficient movement with dodge, which has really been the primary unique thing in UT. I don't think that they necessarily need to add anything that's like, this is the selling point of this game. They need to accomplish what I feel is their goal with this game in terms of movement. So multiple times Epic have said that they want this game to feel more fluid. I know that some people think when they hear fluid, oh, Quake movement is really fluid, and I think that the way Epic views fluidity is more about making decisions. If you make a decision to jump over a gap, that you're going to get to the other side of that gap, and the decision that you make after jumping that gap doesn't change because you make a tiny mistake in jumping that gap. What I'm talking about right here is mantling. They added mantling and said this really increases the fluidity of the game. To me right now, part of the problem with the real base movement is that you're unable to make some really crucial decisions, which are adding a bit of randomness or quirkiness to your movement. And I think that what that really boils down to, and I've said this many times in the past, is that the strafing dynamics right now just feel really mushy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, although I would say it's not just the strafing. I mean, because there's a lot of parts to that, but the thing that I'm really focused on right now is the overall game speed. I just do not believe that 900 is high enough.
Yep.
I did a poll about this. Obviously not nearly as many people participated in the poll as I had hoped. But, out of the dozen or so people that voted, the vast majority of them were in favor of bumping this movement speed up. Right now we're at 900, and I'm proposing 960. Although I would say that 1050 or even 1100 might work. And this could be something that could change this game and make it stand out from the other games. Is maybe it is faster than all of the other games. Maybe that's what we need to balance out some of the other problems that we've had, like the hit scan and so on and so forth. But you can't just theorycraft that, right?
Yeah.
We have to change it and see how it goes. And it's not just something that you can just go and change and walk around a map once and then say, okay, it's good.
Yeah.
It's something that you really have to try for, I'd say, a week or so and see how it actually changes the way that people play the game, because it's going to be in subtle changes. But right now, there's sometimes where you want to do something and you realize that because I'm not fast enough, that thing that I want to do is a bad idea.
Yeah.
You were saying it's the fluidity. I think that fluidity, to me, I like to use the word light. I want to be light on my feet. When I want to be somewhere, I can be there.
Yeah.
And right now you can't.
Yeah, and I think that's true. I mean, right now the movement doesn't feel fluid. I think what you were saying before when you were saying that it feels kind of mushy, I think that really just moving in general feels kind of mushy right now. For whatever the reasons are, it just doesn't feel quick enough, or like you said, light enough. It doesn't feel fluid to me. It doesn't seem to me like it matches up to what Epic wants the movement to be. When I ask questions on the stream about comparing movement values with previous games and stuff like that, and I hear people from Epic constantly saying things like, we really think that the movement's in a good place and really close to being done, that scares me. And the reason why that scares me is because if the movement in this game isn't good, it's likely that this game won't be successful again. And this game isn't...
That was what killed UT3, in my opinion, was that the movement just was too heavy and felt. And I feel like that this game, in that the problems that UT3 had, this game, it's worse.
Yeah, currently right now, because the movement speed right now feels much slower than UT3 did. The strafing dynamics in this game right now are worse than UT3's were. A lot of people on the forums and on IRC have been comparing how this game feels right now to UT3 in terms of how constricting it is. And I don't think that it's as constricting as UT3 was in terms of the ulterior movements that you can do. But in terms of just moving around, I think it does feel just as mushy as UT3 did. So it's kind of my opinion right now that if netcode or whatever needs to change to make it so that they can do a better job of simulating the movement that needs to be there, then it needs to change, because we don't have the luxury of saying, well, somebody can fix this later. If there's a netcode problem that's causing us to not put the right movement for this game into the game, then that's a problem that has to be solved. And that's where I stand.
Yep. All right, well, that's all we have time for this week. As always, we love your comments. I loved some of the comments I saw on this week, especially some people backing us up on the speed, and we really appreciate it. So we'll see you next week.
That was only halftime. It was another 30 minutes.